Okay, welcome to El Maestro. My name is Victor Lecce III, and you are with me. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today is May 6th, and I hope you enjoyed your Cinco de Mayo. If you celebrated it, it was gorgeous weather as it is today as well. I know lately every podcast that we have started or that we have done, we've talked about the weather and how gorgeous it's been, but it is that time of the year, so I hope you're enjoying it wherever you are. This is the fourth episode of this podcast, so we are officially a month in, and I am so glad that I'm giving you this content. We have a full show packed today as well. Most likely will be an hour. We shall see. So, with that out of the way, I wanted to go ahead and do the normal things we do at the beginning of every show, which is going over corrections, and then just some items that I like to speak about before we actually get into the content for today's show. The first thing I wanted to bring up is I have something exciting to share with you. I'm going to start doing some interviews, probably next month, and then after that you can expect, I would say, an interview a month. So I have some ideas, some people already lined up who have agreed to go ahead and be interviewed for this podcast. So as I get more information, I will let you know. And I don't want to give you any teasers yet because I want those teasers to actually be able to grab your interest. But just to give you a little bit that we will be doing some interviews. It will probably be another month, and then we'll start with our first one. So that's the first thing I wanted to go ahead and bring to your attention that we're going to add to this podcast, which is exciting, and I'm excited about it. The second thing, of course, is just the normal items that we discuss in every podcast or every episode of the podcast. First and foremost, I may munch, or you may hear me, and I hope that doesn't deter you, but sometimes I get a little hungry and I want to munch during my podcast. I might be munching on some crisps, as we say in the United Kingdom, or some chips. You also may hear me taking a drink, like I did right there. I am drinking a Monster right now because I need the energy to give you the kind of content that you require and deserve for this podcast. So hopefully it doesn't deter you and you just keep on listening, because I don't do it all the time. The second thing is that I suffer from ADHD, otherwise known as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And the way that'll manifest is sometimes I have trouble recollecting certain facts that I want to bring to you in the show, or I might get them mixed up. And I don't say it to garner your sympathy, but if you're going to give me some, I appreciate it. I say it because that's the reason why we do corrections at the start of every show, because sometimes I swear I said something a different way, and then I re-listen to the podcast and I'm like, I didn't mean it that way. And so corrections gives an opportunity to go ahead and correct that, and so, or correct those mistakes. And so I want to start with that. The first correction that I wanted to give you from last podcast was that I had mentioned that there was an issue in regards to cost of living. In other words, that because of the 401ks and them suffering in the market, and the market suffering as it has been, that it impacts your overall cost of living. And what I really wanted to say was quality of living. So that was the first correction that I wanted to bring up to you today. And the second one, I'm actually having an ADHD moment right now. I can't remember it. So we'll just get into the podcast, and hopefully it'll come to me as we're going through the content for today. So with that out of the way, with that correction, hopefully I can remember the other correction later. I wanted to speak about President Trump's first 100 days in office. It happened last week. Significant milestone. As you know, the first 100 days is the benchmark now for every new presidency ever since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which we have spoken about before in a previous podcast for those who are listeners from the United Kingdom. And you know what? I also want to say before I get going on the first 100 days, just to give you an idea of what else we're going to talk about in the show. We are going to go ahead and continue our conversation about the Ukraine and Russia peace talks. Unfortunately, they're not going any better. You may have seen in the news, and I don't want to say more about that because we'll discuss it when we get to there. The other thing I wanted to discuss today was, I know we had mentioned, I think, in the second podcast, how it is possible to have a third party here, have multiple parties here. And there were elections in Canada and in Great Britain, specifically in England. There were local elections. And it really demonstrates how multiple parties can work. And it gives both spectrums, one with multiple parties expanding, as in the case in England. And in the case of the Canadian election, multiple parties merging more with the establishment party to be able to secure a victory for the Liberal Party in Canada, which was Mark Carney's party, Prime Minister Mark Carney, on the left. And I say that to go ahead and to assure those fears that people who are so entrenched in this two-party system, to go ahead and assure them that voters know how to vote. They know when it is time to go ahead and to, more separate from the main party, delineate on more specific issues that are not being addressed by the two main parties, as happened in the local elections in England, and we'll get to that. Because the Conservative Party, which is the Tories, and the Labour Party, which is like the Democrats here, each suffered some pretty bad showings, a pretty bad showing in that election. Now, the Conservatives, the Tories suffered, another drubbing in their election. They already suffered from the national election or the federal election. If they say federal there, I forget. But the national election. And they also suffered local. And what happened there is that people now are going more to these other multiple parties, whether it's, the Liberal Dems, Liberal Democrats, or the Green Party, or Reform UK, because they feel as if their voices aren't being heard, and a lot of the issues they want to address aren't being addressed in the two main parties, which is the Labour and the Tory Party. But to show that we don't need to have these fears. That really these fears are meant to go ahead and keep us in a duopoly. That people know when they have to go ahead and to vote more to merge and to work with the establishment party to keep, for example, in Canada, the Conservative candidate out who was more closely aligned, say, with Trump than obviously Mark Carney is. And obviously because of all the harmful rhetoric and the tariffs that Trump has placed on Canada, Canadians decided to go ahead and to merge with the Liberal Party there to prevent a victory for Conservatives. And then I have some other stories too for you. I know we said we're going to talk culture and pop culture. I have a story of a cruise gone wrong. For those who are Gen Xers and Boomers, it was not the Love Boat. Da-da-da. It was quite the opposite. It was like the UFC boat, the MMA boat. We will get into that. Also about someone who really loved their phone. How far would you go for your phone? And I guess if you're an Apple user, an iPhone user, you will go pretty far. As opposed for an Android user, my gosh, we can run Android on like any phone. Unless it's a Samsung. Samsung users are pretty attached to their phones as well. And then finally, we have another piece from a funeral owner who promised that he would be very discreet and proper with people who were bringing their pets to him and they wanted their ashes. And it's really alarming and unbelievable story. So with that out of the way, I hope that keeps your attention the other way. I still haven't remembered what the other correction is, but that's okay, because I can always give it to you in the other podcast. Oh, I remembered it. I had said, which will tie into this economy well, or into this, that we're going to talk about the economy again. And I know you probably might be like, oh my gosh, the economy again. But it's so impactful because, and I'm going to go ahead and say this, there was Kamala Harris, former Senator and former VP Kamala Harris just gave a talk at the Emerge conference and said that Donald Trump's tariffs, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it is like the greatest single mishandling or mismanagement of the economy in modern history. And I have to agree with her. And I've been telling you this, that these tariffs have had, an immeasurable so far impact, and it's going to get worse on your portfolios, on your 401ks, your 403bs, your pensions, for small businesses, for even larger businesses. It's going to affect inflation. And, it's going to affect employment eventually. And Donald Trump made a 180, and we talked about it in regards to his trade policy and pausing the tariffs, his global trade war called Liberation Day, and saying he was going to talk with China about reducing the 145% tariff he has on them, on imports. And that, of course, buoyed the markets, and there was a rally. And I had said that had recovered, you should check your 401k, that had recovered almost all of the gains from when Trump started doing tariffs. And that's not accurate. You still are down from when Trump took over the Oval Office because of these tariffs. But that there has been a recovery because he has shifted from that tariff policy, at least shifting it in a way that doesn't impact globally. So let's get into it then. So after the first 100 days, what do we have here for President Trump? Now, I'm not going to go into, I spoke about it a little bit in the first podcast, about the immigration policies. There have been a lot of cuts to the federal government. And perhaps in another podcast, I will go into that in more depth. But what I really want to focus on is how Trump's handling of the economy in the first 100 days. And the reason why is because, this is our livelihood. As I was said earlier in the correction, it's our quality of life. And, depending on how well our 401ks are doing, our retirements, our pensions, depending on how well the economy is doing, also impacts, for example, those services that we receive from the government are not going to be cut. Right now, I talked about my first podcast, how we're looking like they may go ahead. They passed in the House and the Senate bills to cut Medicaid and food stamps because we were going to add to the debt. We were going to run a deficit because we have to continue. We don't have to. The Congress is continuing to want to continue these Trump tax cuts, which have not, by the way, produced the type of growth that it said it would. For the Trump tax cuts to be able to pay for themselves, they were supposed to stimulate growth by cutting taxes cutting the corporate tax and cutting the tax for the wealthy. They're supposed to put more investment into the economy. And what we heard was that it was going to increase the economy, the GDP, to 3.5% to 4%. It has fallen far short of that. And because of that, those cuts have actually added to the deficit, or to our deficit, and then, of course, to our long-term debt. So, and that then impacts, because we only have so much money. Imagine when you do your own budget, you only have so much money. So then you have to go ahead and maybe cut something out. Maybe you go ahead and you decide you're not going to have as many streaming services. Or you're going to go ahead and switch to a different cell phone plan. Like, you go ahead and you do cuts. Or you get another job, which is to add revenue to make up. So you see how this works. It's the same thing for the federal budget. So what happens is that if these Trump tax cuts don't pay for themselves, which they haven't, then that's why you have Republicans now saying, well, let's cut Medicaid and let's cut food stamps. And this is why talking about the economy is very important, because the economy, again, would be humming if it wasn't for Trump's insistence to put on these tariffs. And former Vice President, former Senator Kamala Harris is absolutely correct. You can absolutely point to Trump's mismanagement of this economy and how it's affected people's portfolios, how it's going to affect inflation in regards to the quality of living, in regards to now the costs of living that have increased, to programs that are entitlements like Medicaid and food stamps now on the verge of being cut. And, seemingly his stubbornness and his bullheadedness to continue. And he keeps saying the economy is going to boom. We're going to boom. Well, let's see how we've boomed after the first 100 days. This, just in regards to the market. Okay, so just in regards to the major market indexes, the S&P, the Dow Jones, and the NASDAQ. And of course, we're going to put in the U.S. dollar, because as we mentioned to you in the other podcast, the U.S. dollar is also weaker because of these tariffs. So, after the first 100 days, President Trump's handling of the economy, because of his tariffs, which have created a downtrend in the market, his performance under his leadership for the S&P for the first 100 days is the worst in 50 years. 50. It hasn't been that bad since Nixon. 50 years. Let me go ahead and give you these numbers. So actually, I'm going to give you the projected numbers of where the S&P is now. Now, this is at 100 days, so it's changed since then, but it's around this point. Where it was at 100 days and where it would have been projected if Trump did not put any tariffs. So the S&P, after Trump's first 100 days, remember, this is the worst performance in 50 years. It's at 5,525. And if there were no tariffs, it would have been at 6,300. That's a difference of 12.3%. You've lost 12.3%. In the Dow Jones, it was at 40,113. It finished, without tariffs, without the Trump tariffs, it would have projected to go at 46,725, which is a difference of negative 14. And the NASDAQ, after 100 days, finished at 16,286. Without the tariffs, it would have been projected to go to 21,040. That's a difference of 22%. Now, I've spoken to people. Some people's 401ks are much lower than that, okay? This is just in regard to the major indices. Now, with the NASDAQ, that's bare territory when you get past 20%. The Dow and the S&P, that's still correction. But remember, correction starts at 5% down. So this is way in correction. The U.S. dollar finished at 96.91, the U.S. dollar index, and it would have been at 107.46 projected. That is negative 10.9% or almost 11%. That is, those should be red flags and signs that it's time to cancel these tariffs, as China says, and to go ahead and to do a 180. Now, after 100 days, now when these numbers came out, Well, it might have been actually. I think it might have been this, and then the GDP numbers came out in regards to what the economy has done, which we'll get to in a minute. Trump immediately went on to social media and said, this is Biden's market. Come on, man. You've been in office for 100 days. When you took over, the S&P was at the highest it had ever been. And it's only gone down since you started applying these tariffs. It's definitely your market. Now, remember, this has an impact on your retirements, on your portfolios. So that, of course, increases like insecurity within yourself as to, well, what's going to happen? How am I going to live now? What do I have to do? Now, of course, remember, it depends on where you are in the investing cycle. Like if you're still young, we've talked about this, Gen Z or millennials, or even Gen Alpha soon, but perhaps not millennials, maybe more Gen Z and Alpha, you're thinking, okay, well, it'll go down, but it'll go back up. Right, the market's bullish. We've talked about this. The history of the market's bullish. We've talked about this. But again, I just want to remind you, you can't get that time back. It should be at 6,300 for the S&P. It should be at 46,000, the Dow. The Nasdaq should be at 21,000. Not at 5,500, not 12% down. Not at 40,000, not 14% down. Not 16,000, 22% down. All because of tariffs. The market should be humming. The dollar shouldn't be down 11%, meaning, compared to the euro, you're 11% poorer, just like that. Now, we talked about, the thing about tariffs is that it impacts like every sector of the economy. So that's just the market. But then we've mentioned about inflation. And we've been ringing the bell on that. And we're not the only ones. The analysts, Wall Street analysts have, CEOs of major companies have, the Fed has, and we're already seeing the signs. The PCE, the Personal Consumer Expenditure Report came out, which is the preferred inflation measure, by the way, for the Fed. The Fed likes this more than the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. The inflation increased from quarter 4 to quarter 1 by 1.2%. It was at 2.4 in quarter 4, and on quarter 1, inflation rose to 3.6%. Already, just one quarter, just 3 months, we've gone from 2.4 inflation to 3.6. Remember, this is just tariffs for China, for Canada, and of course leaving it, I think, at 10% for everywhere else because he paused his Liberation Day, the global trade war, but kept on 10% tariffs. We're already seeing a spike of 1.6. I mean, 2.4, what's half of 2.4? Half of 2.4 is 1.2? So, this literally went up, 50%. Am I doing the numbers right there? So I think I said before that it went up by 1.6. That's my ADHD. It went up by 1.2%, which is half, 50%. From 2.4 of where it was on quarter 4, it was at 2.4%, goes up another 50%, and we get to 3.6. Now remember, I'm a social worker at heart, so my numbers may be off. But why is this problematic? Well, you already know. Prices are already expensive. We have paid already way too much in regards to what we've had to pay since COVID. It's 20% higher since COVID. And now inflation's going back up. We can't afford it. And there are a lot of, besides just anecdotal evidence, talking to people, there's a lot of evidence in regards to people really can't afford this. Credit card debt is at a high. Also, people's savings accounts are at a high, what they call M2 figure or M2 dollar balance. Sorry, I don't know the exact term, but you can look it up. It's like M1 or M2. People are pulling back from spending. You're not going to spend more. You're already spending 20% more for the same goods that you did before COVID. And now you're going to end up spending more for the same goods that you did before tariffs. And now they're going to be more expensive after tariffs. And true to form, what do you think that means? Well, people are going to spend less. And we've already talked about how that's a problem because one of the biggest drivers of GDP growth is consumer spending. 2/3 is consumer spending. And true to form, in this quarter alone, consumer spending was at 1.8%. That's the weakest since mid-2023. In quarter 4, it was at 3.3%. That means that represents a 1.5 percentage point slowdown in the economy. 1.5 percentage slowdown. Now you can imagine if that's happening already, what's it going to be like when more of these tariffs are in place? It's going to be a lot more, or it's going to continue. The trend is not good, people. And true to form, what did we end up seeing in GDP? Remember, I mentioned to you that the GDP numbers are about to come out. And if you have 2 GDP quarters back to back that shrink, you're officially in a recession. Now, analysts were predicting that the GDP for this quarter was going to come in at 0.4, lower than what was projected by the Congressional Budget Office at the beginning of the year. We're projected to grow this entire year at 2.3%. Now remember, this is important because this goes back to the budget. So when you think GDP, think of your budget. Say you're going to make $100,000 this year, okay? And that's what you projected. And not just with your salary. Because your salary is like guaranteed unless you lose the job, right? Or you get fired, excuse me. Say it's $100,000 with some other side work you have that you've projected in. Now, what if all of a sudden, as you go on through the year, that you've projected $100,000 in revenue, but you end up losing $10,000 of that, or you end up losing $20,000 of that? Again, you still got your bills to pay. So you either got to cut or you got to try and get revenue from another source. So the Congressional Budget Office said we're going to grow at 2.3%, the GDP. Now that output is going to go for, taxes on individuals. It'll go corporation taxes, capital gains taxes. So what happens if we don't meet that number? Well, again, we're either going to go ahead and increase the debt, or we're going to make cuts, which we can't cut entitlement programs. You can't cut Social Security. You shouldn't cut Medicaid, which is happening. So what happened with this quarter 1? Analysts lowered their projection to 0.4%. Now, if you take 2.3 and you divide it by 4 for every quarter, that means we're supposed to grow 0.57%. So the analysts were already saying we're going to miss. We're going to miss by 1.75%. Well, guess what it came in as? And this is why I think Trump went out on social media and said this is Biden's market or Biden's economy. He didn't say Biden's economy, but that's what's inferring to. The economy actually shrank. It didn't grow at all. You're like, come again? No, it posted negative 3%. Negative 3. When I first read this, I thought it was saying it was down negative 3% from projections. So we had grown maybe 0.2%. No, we didn't grow at all. We contracted. You're like, is that possible? Yes, it's possible. Just like if you are going to, get 100,000 and, you end up contracting so much in a quarter, it ends up being negative. That's what happened here. Now, I want to say to you how remarkable this is in a horrible way. There's only, in the modern era, been three other times the economy has contracted. One is during COVID, obviously, and the other was during the Great Financial Crisis, also known as the Great Recession, but we know we won't call it a recession, during the Great Financial Crisis in 2008. The other time was in 2022 when the Federal Reserve started to go ahead and implement quantitative tightening, which just means that remember, when COVID happened, it had to go ahead and put liquidity into the market. So it was cutting interest rates, and it was also, and I don't know how much interest rates it cut because I think it was around zero then, but it might have cut, I think, and it wasn't helping. That's what happened. And then it did quantitative easing, which is buying bonds, okay? And we can get more into that in another podcast. All I want to say is that in 2022 is they started rolling off those bonds off the balance sheet, meaning they were going to let them mature or not buy new ones, and they were also raising the interest rates at the same time. And so because of both of those measures, which was a tightening of monetary policy, and before it was easy monetary policy, the economy shrank. But that was because of the Fed. It wasn't because of and it had to be done because inflation was spiraling out of control. It was at 9%. So there was a reason for it. The Great Financial Crisis, it shrank because it was the Great Financial Crisis. The GDP shrank. In COVID, it was because it was COVID. Everything was closed down. I mean, that's why it shrank. There should be no reason why our economy shrank in the first quarter. Now, true to form, except that, President Trump is hell-bent on these tariffs, which we're showing you is, the word isn't really bad. The word is just, it's not right for the American economy. It's not right for the American consumer. It's not right for the American business. It's hurting us. Let me show you how much it's hurting us. So let me tell you. In quarter 4, so just one quarter, we were 7th in the world in regards to GDP growth. We grew a total by 2.4% the entire year. That was ranked 7th in the world. After one quarter, we are now out of the top 20 economies in the world. We're the bottom. We're at negative 3%. India, Philippines, Vietnam, China, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Spain, France, UK, Canada, Turkey, South Korea, Mexico, Australia, Brazil, and even Thailand are all ahead of us in regards to GDP output and growth. And let me tell you, Australia, Brazil, and Thailand, they didn't grow at all. It was just, they were at 0% for quarter 1. But because we contracted, because we shrank, we were behind them. Now, a lot of this information I fact-checked and I got from ChatGPT. And I'm going to start saying that in every podcast. Some people may be skeptical, but I'm telling you, ChatGPT is incredible. It is, it's like Google supercharged. It's incredible. It gives you all the sources too, so you can double check. But I'm still very weary and mindful of saying the statistics. I can't believe it's true. But I think the United States is the only country in the entire world whose GDP shrank in Q1. Do we want to be known that way? That our economy is not one of the strongest in the world? And on top of that, that is how we get our revenue for all of the things that we're going to fund in the government. So you see how tariffs are having this multi-pronged, devastating effect on the economy and the American consumer. And, it's not, again, there are companies who are also saying this. It's not just, pundits like myself, if I'm actually a pundit. But McDonald's and General Motors say Trump tariffs is harming business. Again, you can't be America first if you're not concerned or worried about or just say deal with it. It'll get better. You know what? We heard that before. That was Herbert Hoover, who kept saying prosperity is around the corner. Now, the difference between Herbert Hoover and Donald Trump is Herbert Hoover didn't cause the great stock market crash, the Great Depression. He didn't cause the crash of 1929. He just came into power. He inherited it. Trump is causing this. And he's just saying prosperity is around the corner. Meanwhile, you have American companies, McDonald's, General Motors, Ford. We'll get to Ford in a minute. Stellantis, Amazon, Apple. We can go on. Who are saying your tariff war is harming our businesses. You can't be America first and continue your tariff, your global trade war called Liberation Day, and harm American businesses and just say, oh, it'll get better. You're showing you don't care. You're showing ambivalence. You're showing deference. Maybe deference isn't the right word, excuse me. You're showing ambivalence. You can't be America first if you're not concerned about how it's affecting American pocketbooks. You can't be America first if you're not concerned how it's going to increase inflation for the American consumer. McDonald's suffered the worst U.S. sales decline since 2020. That's incredible. It also reports the largest revenue drop in the U.S. since the pandemic. Speaking of the pandemic, Ford has delayed or changed their projections because of the tariffs. They have suspended their 2025 guidance amid a $2.5 billion tariff impact. Now, don't get me wrong. Ford actually beat expectations on their earnings report. But because these because of these tariffs are going to impact them so severely, they suspended their guidance. They're not the only company to do so. 45 or 43, somewhere around the 40s, American companies have either decreased their guidance, meaning their projections of how much revenue they're going to bring in, what their earnings per share will be. They have suspended or decreased their guidance for all of 2025, or at least the next quarter, because they're unsure of how much these tariffs are going to impact their business, how devastating it's going to be to their companies. Now remember, for those who are, you're not a CEO or you're not, the executives, You're like, well, I mean, how is this really going to impact us? Well, most people are smart enough to connect the dots to know that if companies aren't meeting their bottom lines, and we've talked about this in another podcast, they have to somehow. And that means, they're either going to raise prices, which adds to inflation, or they're going to start cutting the labor. So when you start seeing unemployment spike, you got to be really scared, because that's kind of like one of the last dominoes. So this is really concerning. It's not just Ford who has suspended their guidance. It was GM, McDonald's, Amazon, Apple, as we said, Stellantis, Kraft Heinz. You can look it up. I mean, it's several U.S. companies. And I got this from Reddit, so I'll have to confirm it. I haven't confirmed this. But this user was saying, and even if it's not, it's still alarming, because it's 40 U.S. companies already, just in the short time that tariffs have been instituted, are suspending guidance. He said that we're on pace. It's the same amount of suspensions on guidance since 3 weeks into the COVID pandemic. Now, why do I bring up these comparisons? Because it's looking like we're going to a recession. Inflation is up. Consumer spending is down. The GDP contracted. The economy shrank. Companies are suspending their guidance. The market is in correction territory. These are clouds that you just can't ignore. And, with that kind of news, it's going to bring up negative emotions. Now, hopefully, let me say this before I transition to that story. Just let me put a bow on this. So with the GDP, we contracted at negative 3%. If we hit our projected amount every quarter, which, as I told you, is 0.575, we're not going to reach the 2.3%, which is projected. We're going to hit 1.725%. But you got to subtract the negative 0.3. That means we're at a 1.4. That means our economy grew by 1.425%. That is a $245 billion miss and 38% below target. So here again, there's $245 billion that we need to account for. And we're not going to cut from entitlement programs. But be scared, because this administration is seemingly talking about it and showing it with the way they're cutting the federal government left and right, that they're open to it. Now, thank goodness that there seems to be some Republicans, and I think even Donald Trump has said that we're not going to touch Social Security. But then, he also said not going to touch Medicaid, and now we're trying to touch it. It looks like we might. The other way to look at it is that they also said, and we need to handle this debt crisis. But if your policies are running the deficit, as they obviously are, your tariff economy, and you're adding to the debt, and it's creating an economy that companies are warning about, consumers are worried about in regards to their portfolios and their retirements, why are you still doing it? What is he trying to do? It's something to be really concerned about. Because it doesn't appear as if in the first 100 days, it doesn't appear, it's not working. Your tariffs are hurting the American economy. It's adding to the debt, which also hurts the American economy and hurts Americans. Not to mention all of the issues now we have with our allies. McDonald's thinks that part of the reason why it had such, their sales were so down was because of anti-American sentiment. We know the tourism industry is going to be down because of that as well. So all this stuff brings up a lot of negative emotions. And it might make you upset. But hopefully it doesn't make you upset enough to get into a fight after a cruise. You say, what? Yes, we are transitioning now from that. Carnival Cruises had a wonderful 7-day cruise. They went to Cozumel, I think Costa Maya. By the way, beautiful if you've never been. Gorgeous. And then finished it off in Roatan, which is an island off of Honduras. And let me tell you, Roatan's beautiful. You have to go. It's gorgeous. The direct flights somewhere. I thought they were from San Francisco, but someone corrected me the other day. You can even take a direct flight. Now, Carnival Cruises is like, what are you talking about? No flights, take a cruise. True, take a cruise. You'll feel so much better. Well, you should, except for these people. 24 of them got into this huge brawl at the port. U.S. Customs and Border Protection had to get involved because this brawl was massive. This is what I'm going to say to you. If you come off a 7-day cruise and when you get off, you get into a brawl, you need therapy, people. How in the heck do you get into a brawl after a 7-day cruise? Your vibe should be so chill that nothing bothers you. You should be like, I don't know. I mean, you should be as chill as coming out of a massage. As when you have a real good sleep or a good nap. Hopefully you were doing that. What, did these people didn't get massages? I've been on a cruise before, by the way. Royal Caribbean. Nothing against Carnival, by the way. I just was on Royal Caribbean. It was paid for. When I got off that 7-day cruise, I was not looking to fight anybody. I just would have walked by if anybody was arguing. My gosh, I was in the zone. I was in the vibe zone. So for these 24 people, they have been put on a do not sail list. They also should be all given referrals to therapy to find out how is it after 7 days of being on a cruise to the gorgeous parts of Mexico and to Honduras that you would get into a brawl afterwards. You have some issues. And since we're talking about cruises, that means we're getting into international news. It's not the strongest segue, but it's still a segue. And I wanted to ask you, since now we're on international, how far would you go for your phone? Now, most people like myself, I'm an Android user. So don't get me wrong, I love a Samsung phone. But if I can't afford it, you could get any phone. Motorola. I can't think of the other providers right now. But there's all these other ones, right? And Android still runs on it. Apple, they're proprietary, so you got to buy an iPhone. So for me, the most I do for my phone, if I drop it in water, you put it in rice, right? That's supposed to work? It didn't work for me, FYI. That doesn't work. So, what did this person do? So what would you do? Well, this person, and this comes from Japan and Mount Fuji. He scaled Mount Fuji. Well done. 27-year-old mountaineer, a Chinese college student living in Japan. Well done, dude. But when he got up there, he had to get rescued because his crampons, the spikes on the bottom of his shoes, they either weren't working or they had fallen off. And he had to be airlifted off of Mount Fuji. Apparently, he forgot his phone. Okay. Well, get another phone, bro. This is not... we live in a global economy now. Maybe he's afraid that tariffs are going to hit. And so his phone is going to go up by $500. So he went back up on top of Mount Fuji to get his phone. I'm not kidding. And guess what happened? He got stuck up there again. And he had to be airlifted twice. Now, I don't think it was because of tariffs. But, maybe Why else would you climb Mount Fuji after you had to be airlifted? Then you almost lost your life. Isn't your life more important than your phone, bro? I mean, we have the cloud now. This is not like our Gen Xer days when you had like an external hard drive or your hard drive for your computer and you had to hope that they could rebuild it if it's somehow you lost it. The data's in the cloud. I mean, there's an Apple cloud, right? I'm thinking of Google. Like, I mean, you know, your files are up there. I mean, unless you're not backing up your stuff. Anyways, he ended up going back up there and he got stuck again. They said here that due to harsh weather conditions, people are discouraged from scaling Mount Fuji. Well, it looks like they're going to have to stop going from discouraging to actually fining people and closing it down during those harsh weather conditions, during the winter times. And see, that's how you get the bad apples. Always one bad apple. And this time it was a guy who was so obsessed with his phone, even though he'd gotten his life saved, he ended up going back up Mount Fuji again to grab his phone and had to be airlifted again. I hope that phone was worth it, bro. And speaking of continuing on the international discussion, since now we're obviously talking about international news, I have some unfortunate news. We had talked about Donald Trump stepping up in his Ukraine and Russia talks, using maximum pressure as he's done with Iran, using hardball tactics as he has with Canada, Mexico, and the EU, which, by the way, again, I'm not a fan of those tactics. But if that's how you're going to negotiate, then negotiate that way with all, especially those who respond to that kind of negotiation style, which is Vladimir Putin. Well, the U.S. and the Ukraine signed a natural resources deal, and they agreed to establish an investment fund. This is the minerals deal that turned into that huge blowout in the Oval Office. They did eventually sign it, and Volodymyr Zelensky says that it's a fair deal now, and that it's going to spawn investment into his country. Now, I know Volodymyr Zelensky is saying all the right things, and the deal is, like, I haven't looked at it, but it's likely better than it was from the first one. Because the first one was really, I read a little bit about it, it was very colonial in nature. I mean, I think Ukraine only got 50% or something. I mean, it was really bad. And it's their minerals, right? So this one's more fair. But I just have to be honest with you. The optics of this is really bad. You shouldn't be doing this kind of agreement with a country that's in war. I mean, they're in war. And you've threatened to stop aid and assistance if they don't do this deal. I mean, that's low-key extortion. Now, what you do is you continue to support the country. You get a peace agreement. And then afterwards, of course, Ukraine, on the goodwill and all of the assistance that the United States shown, would obviously do that agreement. You don't do it during wartime. And how does the U.S. thank Ukraine for that agreement? They pull out of formal peace talks. They've officially pulled out. Incredible. I mean, where is the hardball tactics? Where is increased sanctions? Where is adding tariffs? Where is I end wars? You campaigned, President Trump, on ending wars. And then here we are. Not only do you get the deal that you wanted, well, not exactly what you wanted. The deal you wanted before was entirely unjust and fair. Now you get a deal that, Volodymyr Zelensky is saying is fair. But to be honest with you, what else is he going to say? Because he's afraid you're going to pull military aid, which is exactly what that alligator Vladimir Putin wants. And then after getting that deal, you go ahead and pull out a formal peace talks? Thank you, we got what we wanted. Adios. Unbelievable. And the other thing, former Vice President and former Senator Kamala Harris said is that there are other Americans who are upset and tired of a complete abandonment of the American ideal and our American ideals. And I would agree with that. This retreating from the world stage and in this fashion is embarrassing. Thank God the EU and other countries within the EU are stepping up. It seems as if Germany had a crystal ball. They knew this was going to happen. This is before the U.S. pulled out of peace talks. Germany said that they pledged that it will help Ukraine even if the United States moves on. I mean, they saw it in the tea leaves. They saw the cards. They definitely saw President Trump's rhetoric, his unwillingness to play hardball tactics with Russia, his, willingness to propose a peace plan that is very similar to Vladimir Putin's, that isn't just or fair to Ukraine. And so how did Germany respond? Well, they respond by saying it's going to help Ukraine even if the United States moves on, because they could tell, they could see all the signs that the United States was going to move on. So Germany surges to the fourth largest global military spender because it knew. Germany has history. Germany is very wise. And that's why there's this coalition of the willing now that Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, and President Emmanuel Macron have been very instrumental in creating and getting commitments from other countries, because the writing was on the wall. The United States was going to leave Ukraine to fend for itself. Now, at least we're still providing aid. But my thing is, if you're going to go ahead and start asking for minerals to continue to supply aid, then we need to do something with Israel. How much aid have we given to Israel? It's more than Ukraine. Not within this past year, but over the lifetime we've been helping Israel. So can we get a mineral deal there too? They have great minerals. The one thing about me is I look for consistency. I'm a social worker. I look for patterns. And when there's a discrepancy or there's something amiss, I want to know why. And I want President Trump to tell us why he will not use the same hardball tactics that he's used with China, with Canada, with the EU, and with Mexico on Russia. I don't think we'll get an answer for that today. We are pretty much at the hour, and I haven't gone through the elections yet in England and in Canada. But I think I'm going to go ahead and do it anyways, because it's important, and I don't want this podcast to be solely an economic podcast. So we may do an hour and 5 minutes, just letting you know. But there were huge elections in Canada and in England. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because it's important for us to see how we could have multiple parties in the United States. Now, I told you before it was possible. What they would do is they would run in, and I got this idea from living in the United Kingdom, watching the Liberal Democrats, who's the party left to Labor, which is the equivalent to Democrats in the United States, and how they increased their seats in Parliament substantially by running in targeted elections. So, that was the theory, and we actually have seen it play out in the United Kingdom local elections. The other parties, which is the Reform UK Party, which is the Trump base here, Liberal Democrats and Green parties all had substantial gains, with the Reform Party showing out huge. And it really hurt the traditional conservative parties, which is the Tories. They gained 677 seats. The Tories lost 676 council seats. Now remember, this is local. Now, and there's a lot more city councils there. So I don't want you to freak out like, oh my gosh, because you think of San Jose. San Jose is huge and it's one council. Like you can imagine like if each district in San Jose was broken up into its own council. That's kind of what we're talking about here. So big time for reform. They now have 10 councils under their control when they had 0. Liberal Dems, they gained 163 council seats and now have 40 councils under their control. The Labour Party, they actually didn't gain any more councils. They retained their councils, I believe. They may have lost a few. They're at 107, but they lost 186 seats. Now, the Green Party only retains one council, but they gained 40 more seats. You see how this is more representation on these councils. I mean, now you have, 676 more. I mean, I'm not a big fan of this, but a Trump-based like party in there. I'm for democracy because people want more of that voice. Same for the Liberal Dems. Now you have 163 more in there. And the Greens 40 more. And it tells those two major parties that they have to expand their platforms. Or they have to narrow it if they're going to get those voters back. Now, the one thing I would say for reform is, and for those of you who are there and excited about reform, I mean, fantastic. Great done, great election. But they have said some really alarming things in regards to the NHS, the National Health Service there. Nigel Farage saying that we should cut taxes, but not giving another way how they're going to pay for it. That sounds like privatization. So be careful there, Englanders. You want to see how reform is going to manage those areas where it holds councils. Specifically, how does it do in housing the homeless? Remember, there are laws placed on councils to house the homeless. Are they actually getting into housing? Going from temporary housing to then social housing. So keep an eye on that. Now, people, of course, get worried because they say, oh my gosh, you see what happened? What if it was like a major election? Liberal Dems would have split the Labour vote and Reform would have split the, Tory, the Conservative vote. But when there is a significant threat to democracy, the voters respond. And even when they have multiple parties to choose from. And we saw it in the Canadian election. Now, the Liberals, which is Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's party, they were down by 20% before Trump started with his colonial imperialist-like rhetoric, saying they're going to be the 51st state and placing tariffs. Conservatives were not only going to win by a healthy margin, they also were going to be able to establish their own government. Well, to have a majority government. Instead, the Liberal Party won, and they're 3 seats short of establishing a majority government, which means they'll have to work with another party to get certain policies passed. Obviously, you're not going to work with conservatives. They don't want to work with you. So there's a Bloc Québécois. They have 22 seats. The New Democratic Party, which was the party to the left of the Liberals, lost 17 seats. They now have 7. So the Liberals can work with them to pass, the legislation they want to pass. The Greens only have 1 seat there. But here's the point I want to bring up in this last few seconds. that the New Democratic Party, which is the party to the left, they had 25 seats in the 2021 election, and they dropped to 7 seats after this election. That means 18 of those districts or constituencies shifted over to the Liberal Party. And why? Because they didn't want the conservative leader there, who was, closer to Trump than obviously the Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney was. They didn't want anyone. They wanted someone who was going to be tough against Trump. And the conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, was not going to be that. So they're in the New Democratic Party, and they went ahead and shifted to the Liberal Party. It's just for this time. And what may happen when things settle down and things get more secure in Canada, then they'll go ahead and go back to the New Democratic Party or the name of another party. So we don't have to have fear of this multiple parties. And in fact, it goes to show on locally, we could have more of a voice for the issues that we want to bring up. And on the federal elections, we can as well too. But if there's someone running that we don't want to get into the office, we'll obviously see more of our common interests together, band together, and prevent that person from coming into office. Well, that's all I have for you today. Well, don't you want to hear about that funeral home person? Really quickly. He's a funeral home director. His name is Patrick Vereb. He runs Vereb Funeral Home in Pittsburgh. He apparently told 6,500 people, yes, I'll take your pet and I'll cremate him for you, and then gave him ashes. Little did they know he was throwing their carcasses into the dump and then giving them fake ashes. And he would charge them a hefty fee. It ended up being $650,000 in total. The AG has set up a website for people to be able to put their claims. What kind of a person takes a dog that's passed away or a cat from a family and then throws their carcass in the trash, takes their money, and gives them fake ashes? Well, all I can tell you is Voltaire talked about that there were different rooms in hell. Mr. Vereb, it appears that there's going to be a special place in hell for you. I can't say for sure, so I'll just say inshallah, Lord willing. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry we went over. We had a lot of content to give you. I will be sure in future to keep it at that hour. You have a fantastic day and stay lit.